My name's Daniel Maguire, and I'm from Ireland. You know that plucky little country whose two major exports to the rest of the world are Irish pubs and Irish people? Yeah, that's the one. In 2015, I fell in love, and I took what would be the first of many flights to and from Canada. For the last 4 years, I've been living more on again than off again on the island of Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Down North is a podcast about island life in Atlantic Canada and how to survive it. I should probably unpack that intro a little bit and warn you that no, I'm not about to do Bear Grylls, I'm not about to drink my own urine or do a Luke Skywalker or a Leonardo DiCaprio and climb inside the disemboweled carcass of a dead animal. When I say survive, what I really mean is address all the concerns, the challenges and the struggles that come with living in a place like Cape Breton Island. One such challenge is the challenge of local news. Its importance to places like Cape Breton Island, the role it plays in the small communities that feature all across an island like this, and the insurmountable challenges and struggles facing local news in this new age. I should admit right off the bat, the importance of local news never fully dawned on me, due to the fact that where I grew up, the local newspaper was what I would call an ad rag. 80% of that newspaper was page-to-page advertisements, and any stories that did feature were largely local girl wins essay contest or poetry competition or local town council opens playground, and they weren't the kind of stories that started the sort of debates that you hear in the national level, and it didn't really seem like they changed anything or really covered anything critical to the community. It wasn't until I moved here to Cape Breton Island and got involved with the Victoria Standard that I really started to appreciate the importance that local journalism can play in communities just like this.
I am Andrew Brooks, and I'm the publisher of the Victoria Standard. I was, up until recently, the editor as well. We have a subscription plus a retail sales that fluctuates between, say, 1,000 and 1,200 people. The original paper was started by Jim Morrow and John Johnson and a slew of other volunteers. And that was done in 1993. So it's now in its 27th volume, 27th year. And we actually took it over in May of 2016. I kind of fell into it. We were more concerned about leaving the United States where we were living at the time.
At the mercy of the most terrifying monster that ever lived.
We were less concerned about figuring out what the next steps in our career were going to be. I had been given a heads up by my sister, who's the librarian in Quebec, and she gave me an indication that there was a fellow who ran a small community newspaper, and he was at a point where he wanted to have it sold. So I thought about my skill set. I had been shooting photographs since I was 5 years old. My dad put a camera in my hand, literally at the age of 5, and showed me how to use a manual Minolta. I'd been writing for well over 25 years. I had also been doing graphic design for about that same amount of time. So when I started to look at the skill set, I thought, the only thing that I haven't done that isn't appropriate to the newspaper is journalism.
It's a thing you're going to learn on the job anyway. They can only teach you so much in a classroom. I'm Mary Campbell. Cape Breton Spectator is a weekly online publication because it's online only. But in my heart, I think of it as a newspaper. I grew up in a newspaper family. The Highlander folded in 1976. They lasted 13 years, and at their peak, they had the biggest circulation for a weekly east of Montreal. I still knew I wanted to be a journalist. Graduated into a really bad market, then decided that I was going to work with Via Rail. The month they cut the line and I was losing my job, Jim McNeil, who ran a chain of newspapers in Prince Edward Island, called. And he was ready to hire either me or my sister. And so I answered the phone and I got the job in PEI. And then I moved to Prague and I ended up working in journalism for 14 years. I went for 2, I stayed for 14. I kept saying, I'm going home. Whenever I would refer to Cape Breton, whenever I would go to Cape Breton. And at some point, it's like, isn't it time maybe you lived in this place that you've been calling home for 25 years? So I came home in 2010. It took me a while to get more engaged with what was going on here. My problem was too much of the coverage was human interest. And I had lots of questions about things that were happening in municipal government, particularly around our port. And that's when I started the Spectator. When I first started writing, I was bursting with things, and I realized I could put stuff on Go Cape Breton.
My name is Richard Lorway. I'm president of LOKOL.INC, and we are the company that owns and operates GoCapeBreton.com. GoCapeBreton.com is a community website and social media channel. We use a piece of software which we call our social velocity engine. I think in the tech world you tend to develop clever buzz names for these things. It's kind of an artificial intelligence. What it does is, if you take in 10 stories from the Cape Breton Post, say, the software looks at kind of social traction these stories are getting online, understanding what people want and where they want it and when they want it, and getting it to them faster. We developed the platform initially to help the community live our lives more successfully and to collaborate and work on problems together, that kind of thing. We are active in finding and sharing content that interests us and we think is of interest. And we also allow people to create free membership accounts and post and share their own news and information directly with the local community.
I have come to realize that the community newspapers, for instance, truly produce a scale of news that you don't find in other realms. You find news there that you don't necessarily find in a provincial paper or a daily paper, that you don't find on Facebook or the internet for that matter. I do think that community issues and letting the community know about an issue that they may not have known before, that's going to build a new kind of understanding for people.
So we used to have a fellow that worked here. His name was Rory Andrews, and he was born here in Cape Breton. But at a certain point, his family moved away to the U.S. when he was like 9 or 10, and he lived down there for a couple of years. And then he came back. So in a way, he kind of had the immigrant's perspective, right, where he could look at certain things and say, well, why? And a very humorous writer. Anyway, he wrote an opinion piece about, well, what's downtown Sydney for anyway? The basic premise was that, downtown Sydney is not a failed mall. We have to stop thinking about it in terms of it's a pure retail center. We're never going to out-mall the malls. You could fire a cannon down Charles Street, not hit anybody most evenings. People of his generation would like to live downtown Sydney, where they can be together, especially millennials like to be together, even if they're all texting on their cell phones. In successful cities, people live their lives downtown. It suddenly took off. We can look at Google Analytics in real time and see how many people are on the site. And we had 200 users on the site simultaneously reading the article. It went on for hours. And we thought, well, this is a mistake. There must be something wrong. Checked our settings. No, in fact, it was real people. And the amount of comments and interest it generated, it went through the roof. That had a huge impact. Somebody put it in writing. And then suddenly, so there was a point, something that everyone could discuss. But frankly, professional politicians often don't appreciate that, especially if they're being criticized.
You're going to get in trouble whenever you bump heads with the powers that be and the vested interest. Good trouble, right? I think it's really important in a town like this. You have to be willing to say the stuff that a lot of people think but can't say, especially when you're talking about government. There's so many reasons why you don't want to say anything, that you don't want to stick your head up and you don't want to piss people off, but you might question somebody else to it.
I think sometimes because we've chosen to publish issues in the new version of the Standard that might be construed as a little more aggressive than the older version, I think sometimes people think we're hunting for inappropriate activity, or we're hunting some sort of conspiracy.
A lot of people out there who think I'm a complete whack job, because every now and then I get a note from somebody saying either you are a complete whack job or you're not nearly as big a whack job as everyone says. It's not just about generating heat. That I want to be clear about.
Our plan is to report the news, not create the news. The truth of the matter is we just want to see, that government is running the way that it should be running for the people. I think that just the presence of having media there, it forces people to think twice about what they're saying, how they're saying it, and also the actions that they're taking.
One of my huge pet peeves, especially here in Nova Scotia, is freedom of information. We have a terrible system. We have a privacy commission who's got no teeth. They're so backlogged because they're so understaffed, because the province is so not interested in really being transparent or open. It is so warped. It's in the air, right? The federal government is not very good about it. The provincial government is really bad. And here in the CBRM, they have this idea that they're allowed to charge you thousands of dollars if it takes them time to gather the information that you have every right to have. There's a famous one where a guy asked for a whole bunch of travel and business expense information, and they told him it would cost $43,000. That's a big fee for me to pay to get information that I'm entitled to out of the municipality. It's public servants and elected officials traveling on public money. Their view of it is, well, our employees had to spend their time doing that, but their employees are already paid. Responding to requests is part of the job description. So it would be like if you made me pay because of the firemen coming to my house or because of the police. We pay. It's covered. And if you don't staff properly to allow for that, that's on you. That's a terrible thing. It's not just not in the spirit of the law. I would say it's throwing the access to information law out the window. Like, if you can't enforce it, and if you have to pay for it, it doesn't matter that you've got a right to the information. You don't have access to it. I want to know where the mayor is going when he travels. Who's he meeting with? That's a reasonable thing for citizens to want to know. He'll file travel expenses that'll say things like, port meeting. And you have no idea what he was discussing. I don't consider that transparent and accountable.
So local news, it would appear, is not just a place where you can go and get your warm, cuddly, human interest stories. Local news has this ability to alert us to a perspective or an idea that we never considered before. It has this amazing ability to light fires under people. Local news is more than just the human interest. It's more than just paying homage to the local bake sale and running advertisements for local businesses. It is a force to be reckoned with. There is, however, an elephant in the room.
It's no secret that nationally and internationally, local newspapers are dying.
It's very possible that once the seniors who are really wedded to the print edition are gone, that might be the death knell of the print edition.
The way they scale and operate, it's almost impossible to make money. Advertising has moved away from newspapers to online. It's hard for them to shift from the status quo. Consequently, most local newspapers have not really adapted successfully to the online world. If you haven't got a business strategy that is mobile driven, then you've missed the boat. And in fact, it's already too late.
If things are really as grim as the picture that Richard paints, then what would a world without local news look like? What was the first thing that we lose? Will it have any knock-on effects on a national level? And is there something about now that makes local news and the confidence in it more important than ever?
The term fake news didn't exist 10 years ago. There may have been misleading stories before then. This perception that news is being generated for the illicit purposes or the intention of misleading. I think that's also a byproduct of social media and foreign influence. We've seen that.
There's a certain type of person who wants to believe what they read. That's what fake news is all about. And I get it, because every now and then I'll see a headline and I'll think, that's great. What a great piece of news. And then you look at the source and you realize, no, that's a totally made up. Maybe there's a kernel of truth in it, but they're targeting me because they know. They know that's going to appeal to me. Some people who are always going to want to just be told what it is they want to hear, I don't think that's going to change. I just have more faith in people and their ability to kind of realize, okay, you have to be a little more critical about what you're reading.
I guess to bring it home to the local journalism, what I'm seeing is a lack of confidence at that national level. And I think what is so important about trusted, vetted, professional journalism at a local level is it's gone through the filter and it's made sure it's been fact-checked. And the statistics show that local community newspapers are more trusted than almost any other source of media. You don't have Facebookers that are sitting in the gallery of a local council meeting posting on Facebook about how council went. You would lose that kind of information. And that really is vital to the operation of a town, of a village, of a municipality. Municipal politics is where some of the most fascinating things and most important things happen in terms of decisions that make an impact on someone's life.
First thing that happens when you lose the newspapers, is that the government knows that nobody's keeping an eye on them and they do whatever they want. And they're bad enough when people are keeping an eye on them. As local papers disappear, it just emboldens government, right? I don't want to present government like they're all just crooks waiting to take over. It's not that. Always easier to make decisions when nobody knows what you're doing. The best case scenario, people would spring up to try to find ways to provide the same and maybe better content. If journalism became the purview of people, crazy people like me who just love it and are willing to make the kind of sacrifices you have to make a living at it, which just means you work really hard and you don't make anywhere near as much money as you could in PR, we could come out even better.
With the demise of local newspapers seeming like it's inevitable, what is the future of local news? Will local news and informing the community become the purview of social media and internet-based platforms like Richard's? And if that happens, is community news in good hands?
I think that particular model that Go Cape Breton's using is really interesting.
What we do scales differently. We think it is a better business model for the online world.
At the moment, it comes across as a bit of a hybrid between some of the biggest concerns of social media as well as some of the advantages of social media and advantages of local journalism.
I think the way that technology has changed in the last 30 or 40 years in terms of social media, the way that people are able to participate is changed rapidly. I don't think the current political system has evolved. They still think of social media just as a PR function, right? It's not an engagement function, really. People are much more informed and they're much more engaged and they're able to. I think we're trying to enable a more participatory form of democracy.
As a news aggregate, they're a place where different local news sources can come together as a smorgasbord, as a all-you-can-eat buffet type thing that people can then go off and say, I want a little bit of CBC or a little bit of the Victoria Standard.
You know, we're not bound by news cycles. We see something, we can share it right away. We get it out to people right away on the platform of their choice at their time. The whole idea of aggregation by itself has significant value. If you're a member, you get a daily digest email, and the most popular 10 stories from the day before are in a list, and you can click on them and find out what's going on. That kind of curation has value for people who are leading busy lives, and they have 5 minutes, and they want to see what's happened in the community, and they don't want to go, jump on a desktop computer somewhere and spend time researching.
I think some of the stuff that they will have to work out at one level or another is what, again, has been necessarily an edited or vetted or scrutinized piece and something that's more editorial or blog in nature. And I know that they're publishing both. And they also bring up a really interesting concept of advertising where some companies have the ability to really write a story that's advertorial in nature. They're really promoting a business, but it's getting in that top 10 stories in the morning. Sometimes it's hard to know what you're watching and what you're listening to.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe I'm old school in that way, but I think it's important for people to know the thing that I'm about to ingest or take in is an opinion, and it's based on some facts or it's based on this, but ultimately it's coming. There's a really specific angle. And of course, no news is 100% objective.
I think about this a lot because I was trained that journalists are supposed to be objective and neutral. The tradition was that if you worked as a reporter for your career, you were rewarded with a column. And when you got the column, all of a sudden you could express opinions. But I don't think anybody believed that you didn't have those opinions the whole time you were writing. You had them. And the idea that it wasn't in any way coloring what you were doing is really unlikely.
There is different ways in which we interact with that information if we know it's a series of either paragraphs or video or audio that's simply reporting fact. I wouldn't want to necessarily overly restrict opinion. I think we do need that to foster debate.
It's important. We see the site as a place where you can hold those kinds of important conversations and try to build consensus and try to bring the sides together and everyone gets to share their argument.
As long as it's, the discourse is civil and we're not involving hate speech.
More conversation is usually better than less.
Yeah.
Having said that, I do see how social media in many ways has contributed to an increased tribalism. It can be divisive. What we've tried to do with our platform is establish sort of rules of engagement. People need to speak to the issues and not engage in ad hominem attacks on other people, on their character. There are certain lines when you cross over, your content gets deleted, and if you persist, then your account gets deleted. So to participate in any way, you have to be a member, and you have to use your real name. It's not that we want to be cops here. We never censor comments if they are fair comment. What we want to create, though, is a safe space where people can have, real discussions about things that concern them.
The ability for anyone to get on and say, within reason, just about anything is incredibly empowering. I get it. I get the excitement of it. And I think that social media has its purpose. But as we've seen the volume of digital code, zeros and ones, pushing through those pipelines in exponential ways, it just becomes more and more difficult to say, okay, I understand what this news is. I understand where it came from. I understand who generated it. I understand who shared it and who's choosing to post it now. Has anything changed? It's a little like the broken telephone game. Is that first message still the same, 13 people along or 13,000 people along? For the survival of any kind of good journalism, I think we need our audiences to be better educated, because there are people out there unfortunately with less than perfect ideals.
What's obvious is that things are changing, and not just on a local level. The models that have sustained newspapers, both local and national, for so long are changing by the day. There are major newspapers that have switched completely to online and subscription-only services and editions. It is not just local news that is in jeopardy. And if local news really is in jeopardy, then what is the solution? What can you do to prevent it from happening? And I think the answer is simple. The only way to preserve local journalism is to support it.
I think I tend to talk about people on this island like there's something special. Like I remember reading once that people in Venice say things like, the water in Venice is very wet. So I think I'd say things about Cape Breton that maybe are actually true of a lot of places. But I do think it's true that people here care about news. I think they've always been supportive. I think if you look at the history of how many newspapers there have been here and how many small newspapers are still making a go of it.
There are communities of significant size that have no daily newspaper whatsoever. I mean, Surrey, BC has 360,000 people and no daily newspaper. And when you look at them, you think of our community with, less than 90,000 in the CBRM, and we have 2 newspapers that publish here daily. We are, for the size of our community and the health of our community, we're relatively well served by local newspapers. There are thousands that are not.
You have to vote with your dollars. And in the age of internet, we have become very presumptive that we can get whatever we really need or want free of charge.
Every time somebody says, I'm going to pay you for the news that you're producing, I know that I'm being taken seriously, because people don't pay for stuff if they don't trust it. There is really no bigger vote of confidence, especially somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, right? You really have to think every month about how you spend your money, and you've decided that my newspaper is one of the things that it's worth paying for.
We are coming around to a point where we realize, we are going to have to pay for a certain amount of quality and to have a certain amount of assurity. But I think if that's the case, then, recognize that and vote with your subscription dollars.
It's what I do, right? Like I look at what I'm paying for Patreon and for my PayPal payments every month, and almost everything is a little bit of money going to somebody somewhere in this province who's trying, like Robert dept, who's got the Nova Scotia Advocate. He covers social issues like nobody else. Then there's Tim Busquets Examiner. Maureen Google's got Google Wesh on First Nations issues. Yeah, I subscribe to all kinds of stuff. Even if I don't have time to read it, even if it's a community that I'm not as deeply tied into, I want to support it.
Vote with getting involved in sending in information and becoming part of the team.
My name's Daniel McGuire, and you've been listening to Down North, a podcast about life in Atlantic Canada and how to survive it. Contributors for this podcast have been Mary Campbell, editor and publisher of the Cape Breton Spectator, Andrew Brooks, publisher of the Victoria Standard, and Richard Lorway, president of LOKOL.INC and GoCapeBreton.com. Links to their websites and publications will be in the description below. or wherever the particular platform that you're listening on has decided to put the descriptions. Podcasts are a fantastic thing, and it's no exaggeration to say that they have changed my life. If you haven't enjoyed this, assure you there is something out there tailor-made for you. So please do explore the world of podcasts. This is a free podcast, and you can listen for free on the various platforms and wherever you choose to listen. If you have listened to this podcast and you really have enjoyed it, let's say, for example, you've seen me at your local coffee shop, you really enjoyed the podcast, and you want to pay for my coffee or buy me a Danish, you can do that once a month through Patreon. You can donate however much money you want, and that just supports the channel, it supports the podcast, and allows me to keep producing this content. A good way to help that doesn't involve any money is to like and share and show it to friends, and make sure that you rate it and like it in whatever platform you're using, and subscribe as well. The music in this podcast is the song Days by Cusco, and it is available on icons8.com. Links below in the description.